More can go wrong than just feeling blue. Overstimulated, overheated, and feeling too good to notice, a small number of ecstasy users have literally danced themselves to death.
It opens the door to dehydration. If you don't hydrate and drink enough water constantly during this time, body temperature soars up to 107, your brain fries literally, and they die.
In 1982, Texas Senator Lloyd Bentsen brings awareness of excessive ecstasy use to Washington and the Drug Enforcement Agency. Under the authority of the 1970 Controlled Substances Act, ecstasy is immediately placed on an emergency ban. Overnight, the drug becomes illegal. Possession is a crime. Under this law, the emergency ban expires 2 years later.
And so in 1984, the DEA began a series of hearings to see whether the drug should be illegal or not and how it should be made illegal.
At the hearings, the key question is this: can ecstasy be used medicinally, or should it be banned outright? Supporters of the drug believe it could be beneficial, but would like to research it further.
I think the DEA in some ways was surprised that suddenly therapists came forth and saying, well, in fact, that they're using the drug and that it is, in their minds, a useful tool in therapy. What came to be an issue was what the definition of medical acceptable use is. And on the one hand, you had therapists saying they were using the drug and that it was useful. On the other hand, you had scientists saying, well, but it's not meeting the definition of being scientifically proven to be useful.
And society.
Advocates argue to keep the drug legal for two reasons. First, they believe it is useful in therapy. Second, making it illegal would ban all future research. Without research, there can be no study of the drug's effects. Opponents believe the drug is dangerous and ironically cite the lack of MDMA research to justify a ban. After an official finding, the Drug Enforcement Administration overrules the judge.
The administrative law judge that was overseeing the hearings that were held to determine if ecstasy should be made illegal, or MDMA, didn't think it should be, and he was overruled by the federal government, and it was banned. We've got the transcripts. He couldn't find any reason why, and it was a Schedule I.
When the government categorizes the drug as Schedule I, it is judged to have a, quote, high potential for abuse and no medical use. As a Schedule I drug, ecstasy is outlawed from further testing. This is the first time a specific act of Congress is not required to make a drug illegal. In the early part of the 20th century, heroin, cocaine, and marijuana are legal drugs too. In spite of their dangers, Congress is unable to ban them because that is seen as a violation of the Constitution's assignment of police powers to individual states. But that changes when a fearful public demands Congress to act. They do, basing the first federal drug laws on taxation. By 1984, when ecstasy is banned, society's attitude towards drugs and the Constitution has changed.
The key thing to watch in drug use is where is the middle class. If the middle class is deep into drug use, you'll find that the laws are not so severe. If the middle class is out of it, can't understand why anyone would take drugs, the laws are going to get very severe against those who do use it.
So how is ecstasy banned without an act of Congress? The answer belongs to a modern policy that emerges out of another drug in another time, LSD. The drug that some believe will change the consciousness of America does more to change American drug laws and the way legal drugs become illegal. 1968. LSD use is at its height. Within 2 years, possession of this innocent-looking sugar cube will land a user in jail for up to 20 years. All because a Swiss chemist 30 years earlier chooses to look at things a little differently. 1938. The Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann is on the hunt for a drug he hopes will energize the human circulatory system. Experimenting with ergot, a mold that grows on rye, Hoffman discovers a substance that will someday shock the status quo of a nation, LSD.
His 25th extraction was lysergic acid diethylamide number 25. He accidentally gets exposed to it during the extraction process. He suffers the ergot poisoning that people suffered for centuries before him. But instead of saying, this stuff is horrible, this is scary, this is bad, he's the first guy who says, that was interesting.
20 years later, the Cold War changes the destiny of LSD. In a world preoccupied with fears of nuclear annihilation, the stakes get higher in the game of spy versus spy. The Soviet Union's espionage tactics are a threat to American security and must be thwarted. As the U.S. Army tests MDMA, the CIA tests LSD as a potential Cold War weapon.
Somebody in the higher up of the CIA wrote to the people who were going to do this that their ideal drug was a drug which would cause you to forget all the secrets you had learned, but otherwise you'd be completely normal.
But LSD does not work the way the CIA had hoped.
There were people who had taken it and had had very severe psychotic reactions. In some cases, it probably precipitated or was a straw that broke the camel's back in creating schizophrenia, and they never came back.
One man's schizophrenia is another man's enlightenment. A decade later, Timothy Leary, a Harvard researcher, champions LSD as the greatest hope for humankind's happiness.
LSD, used wisely, can produce the greatest ecstasy that man knows, the ecstasy of revelation, seeing that there's more.
Leary's message falls on the ears of a new generation disillusioned with the values of the past and eager for something new.
Of course, it's a whole different way of life. It's a whole different way of living. But more than that, it's a whole different way of thinking.
Would you like to take a walk with me through homes in the Haight-Ashbury area and see all these people that are brilliantly exploring their inner consciousness?
Leary's prescription for happiness is based on a drug that alters sensory perception, but it is more like a short circuit in the brain.
In terms of the switchboard of the body, every nerve in your body communicates with other nerves through certain chemical messages. There are places on the nerves to accept these messages, and there are places on the nerves that send these messages. Normally in a communication switchboard, Bill can talk to Fred. But when you take LSD, Bill gets plugged into Fred, Betty, Sue, Rex, his dog, the local tree, the moon, 18 memories from the past, imagination from the future, all are plugged in at the same time. So that you look at something and you hear a sound. You hear something and you get a taste.
What happens is the ordinary becomes extraordinary because of the disorganization of the brain function. And so reality becomes very interesting. You can be fascinated by a dripping faucet, for example, or a fabric pattern on a sofa. You can watch that for 4 hours.
Some see LSD's effect as mind-expanding. Others call it dangerous, even stupid. In any event, a generation flocks to the drug. For some, it alters perceptions to the extent that it changes behavior.
I can tell you, in one day, I went from being a math major with a minor in Chinese language to the next day, I wanted to stand and hug trees. And I mean literally, I was a barefoot hippie overnight.